And up next, we're really excited to introduce Dr. Ravi Chawla. He is the founder of Chakra Tech and a multidisciplinary engineer and scientist, leveraging technology to drive sustainability innovation. And today he's going to be talking to us about the evolution of plastics from nowhere to everywhere. Welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. All right. So when you see this title, what do you think? What comes to your mind when you see this?
Plastic mountains.
Plastic mountains. That's exactly right. But also, I'm a trained academician, so I think the idea is how the hell did we get here? As you said, the mountains. So this is a fancy way of how the hell we got here. Does that really matter to us? Maybe you don't see it in San Diego, although I would say that it's coming up in Miramar. We will have our own mountain. And, how do we solve this problem? So I want to keep this talk very interactive. I don't, I can get very technical. You'll not remember anything. So my goal here is that the kind of talk I would like to attend is like, okay, maybe at least I'll take something out of this talk. And what I'm going to give you is a framework so that maybe as you go about your life in every day, you'll see that plastics are all around you. Does anybody disagree? Anybody here has not used plastic today? If they can, oh yeah, everybody has the bottle. We'll get into it. I don't have good news about that, but we'll get into it. So the original talk was titled "History of Plastics," and I was terrible at history in high school. I almost thought that I should not finish high school because that's how bad I was at history. But chose the wrong topic. But this will give you a flavor of some of the ancient history part. And I wish my teacher had told me at least that part of the history. But we'll get into when the industry took off in 19th and 20th century. We'll also talk about microplastics in the ecosystem, and perhaps everybody has their own ecosystem. Maybe you care about ocean more than you care about soil. Everybody has a reason to be concerned, and perhaps you don't care about environment at all. Well, you definitely care about your body, so we'll get into that aspect, and then we will get into the outlook for 21st century. A lot of things that I want to cover here. Not enough time. We'll see what we can do. I might skip some of the parts that you can easily find on Google, but I do want to give you something that, some quality research papers and data that I think were necessary for convincing my own self to consider that this is actually a problem. So this is 500 hours of spending over the last 6 months. So if I jump, you can slow me down. All right, so we are going to dive right into this. So we're going to start by plastics by number. So, I'm not going to give you all those stats. I'm not going to remember the stats myself, but I do want to give you a framework of remembering what the plastics around you are. Everybody has seen these numbers on their bottles. If you have a bottle in your hand, you can look at, it says number 1. Have you ever paid attention to it? Everybody else? You know what that means? This is PET, polyethylene terephthalate. It's one of the plastic that came around it was discovered in 1939, but actually the bottles didn't come about until 1972. It was a discovery by a DuPont engineer, and he was very interested in how do you store carbonated bottles, carbonated soda, right? He was very interested in that aspect, but that's PET for you. Other things that we have, our cleaning spray bottles are also made out of it. And this will become clear. So I'll take you through number 1 through 7. And then I'm going to give you even more polymers. But this is just an introductory part where you see what the flavor, at least the 7 ones that you see every day in your life. There are more. All right, number 2, HDPE, high density polyethylene. Laundry detergent, buckets, shampoo bottles. These are made of this polymer. Number 3, credit card. I hope everyone has one. I'm sure you do. And then you can see that even the IV fluid bags are made of PVC stands for polyvinyl chloride, and plumbing pipes are also made of PVC. I don't see any PVC pipes here, but yes, they're around us. Number 4, plastic bags. We go to the grocery shop every day or every week, and we are using LDPE every day. Number 4. And by the way, I'm telling you all these numbers. These numbers were assigned in 1988 by the plastics industries because they wanted to streamline the process of labeling, but this is not used by neither the recyclers nor the manufacturers. So people just put the numbers, but it doesn't mean much. But just so that every time let's say tomorrow you pick up your trash bag or your even containers, you can see the numbers and you know what these numbers mean. Your straws are made of number 5, PP polypropylene. Your medicine bottles are also made of this, yogurt containers, among other things. These are just limited examples, and you can find many of these examples around you. Every time you buy a plastic container, try to find this number, and this will inform you what material you're using. All of these are petrochemical based, so they're fossil fuel derived. Number 6, polystyrene. Some of the single-use plastics, styrofoam containers, actually that's polystyrene. I don't think anybody has one in their hand right now. Takeout food container, also not the ideal one. This is bad for contact with food, but we still use it nonetheless. All right, everything else gets clubbed into number 7. Your sunglass frames, plastic brick toys, electronics, what have you. There is no number for it, and that's one of the problems with plastic, that there is no framework for standardization. We only listed 6 main ones, but there are at least 100 plastics in use, and that's all get plugged into number 7. Furthermore, the recycling statistics, I don't know if you guys have been keeping up. The number is that less than 5% of the plastic that we think is getting recycled actually gets recycled. The numbers are terrible there. And even when it was thought it was a solution, it's not. We will get into that aspect a little bit as well. All right, so as I mentioned, history. I'm terrible at history, so I actually had to learn. I knew about Charles Goodyear. I'd heard some stories. How many of people here know about Charles Goodyear and the origin of? All right, just a few. So Charles Goodyear, so the company Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company based out of Ohio, they had nothing to do with him. The company was created in 1898, I think, in honor of Charles Goodyear, but he himself did not have anything to do with it. He did not make the gains. This guy is, the history, perseverance at its finest, and also, not only perseverance, but also a very kind person. And you can tell this by, when I looked up all the court hearings that he had to go for his patent violations, people sued him all the time and they thought that he infringed on his, he had infringed on their patents. He would still say that, no, I want to sow the seed so that humanity can take it further. Anyway, gem of a person. I really admire reading about this. But basically, what he did was he invented vulcanization of rubber. And does anybody know where the natural rubber comes from?
Trees.
So, okay. Because recently I spoke to somebody and they were like, does it come from trees? They were shocked. So yes, it comes from trees. But even before Charles Goodyear got there, people could figure out what the rubber articles around them were. But the problem with rubber articles in its original form is that when it gets too hot, it got sticky. And when it got too cold, then it would become brittle. So they needed a solution. That's where Charles Goodyear came in. And this is a view from, the artist's pitch for him being in his kitchen. He actually inhaled a lot of nitric acid. He turned his home into a lab. He was not a trained chemist. He self-taught himself. So we can all learn chemistry. There is hope. What he did was he added sulfur into natural rubber, which you can see on the container, and then he heated it. What that did was that stabilized rubber. That is the first semi-synthetic polymer or plastic that we saw. But all the credit to Charles Goodyear, but I refuse to believe that this is the first instance that humanity would have seen it. And you can see even in, I could find articles from France as early as 1750, or actually the name rubber came from someone went to a trip on Ecuador. They found that they brought the material. They're like, oh, it erases. It's a rubber. That's the name. That's how the name came in. But I have to tell you that rubber is something that was used by ancient civilizations. We will get into the timeline. Any guesses on how old this process might be?
Nine-sided rubber ball on their courts.
That's a good one. He got me, so he's going to beat the timeline. So we'll get there. So the Malaysian natives in Malaysian archipelago, they were using gutta percha. Gutta means latex. Percha means rag. They were making tools out of this in 15th century. This article made its way to England, and I think this picture is from 1652. But as Western society has done over and over, they rediscover things. It was rediscovered by an English doctor in 1822, but this was already around for a really long time. And what Nick mentioned, rubber balls. There is documented evidence that as early as 1600 BC, this is from carbon dating, that Mayans were making rubber balls. And you can stabilize rubber form. So a natural rubber ball, which is not vulcanized, will actually not bounce. This was bouncy. So how did Mayans get it? The way Mayans solved this problem was morning glory. They would boil the natural latex with morning glory, the juice of morning glory, and it would stabilize the rubber. And they had raincoats, they had shoes. I went into reading this MIT article on how they were actually the first polymer scientists in a way, because you actually have to mix them in equal proportion for it to work. Otherwise, the ball is not bouncy. So that's one other technical fact. But again, I refuse to believe that this would be the ancient usage. And any other guesses that anybody could take of where the earliest instance might be? Okay.
Persians.
Again?
Brazil.
Yeah. So, of course, in India would have done it. So the reference is shellac. So has anybody heard of shellac? It's called French polish. A lot of times it's used as a varnish to make your tables look good. But the way I figured out shellac was because I took. I'm gonna get into the history of it. So Sanskrit, I took Sanskrit in middle school, and I was like, okay, the word lakh, it's a derivative of Hindi root word or Sanskrit root word meaning 100,000 lakh. Which means that there are actually 100,000 of these bugs that takes to produce a pound of it. And the earliest documented instance of this is from an Indian scripture called Mahabharata. And what they had done was they had made, it's a story to whatever extent you want to believe, but they had made flammable houses of shellac. So that's the documented instance of 3,000 years ago. And if you haven't heard of it, that's fine. I brought some candies here. And if you don't think you're eating plastic, this also gets sold as confectioner's glaze. So next time you're buying these Jelly Belly beans, you know that that's what you're getting. Also, when you go to the store, next time you look at your cashew apples or citrus, the one that grows at your house versus the one you have in store, I don't know if you have noticed a difference. Guess what? It's an excretion of a bug that's deposited on your food. So it's everywhere. It's actually also approved by the FDA to make the coating of your medicine. So, and I believe that I don't have evidence for it. I need to check. So fish oil capsules, they have appearance, and they don't. You want them to be stable in your gut, but then as they go down the intestine, you want it to dissolve back. It's a $167 million industry. It primarily originates in India. There's a very nice Business Insider video on this that came out 1 week ago. They beat me to it because we were trying to get, bangles made out of it from India. We couldn't find someone so that I could show it to you. But anyway, good for Business Insider. All right, so this is the ancient story of plastic. And somebody would have to keep me on time. They would have yelled 10, 20, and 25 so that I stay on time.
15.
Okay, great. You're really behind. All right, so we're gonna. All right. Oh yeah, there was a second rediscovery of gutta percha, where in the we think that things got violent in the U.S. Congress now. seems like, one of the Republican representative hit a Democratic representative in 1857 during the Civil War era. So, I love US because you can reinvent a lot of things here. All right, so this is where the story starts, and I'm not going to dwell on it so that we can spend more time on the outlook and the 20th century, but I'm going to go very quickly past, from 1839 to all the way to what we are in 21st century. We talked about the natural rubber already. Polystyrene, the foam cup, number 6, was in 1840. It would still take another 80 years before it actually gets commercialized. Parkinson. So it was invented by Alexander Parks. He named the material after himself. This was nitrocellulose. And the reason it was invented was at the time, in 1861, New York Times carried an article of how, billiard balls, all the rich people were playing billiard balls and billiard game, and it was made of ivory at the time, and it was killing all the elephants. And there was a search for an alternative material. Parkinson came in. The problem with this material was that it was very expensive, so it could never be commercialized. It took another 7 years. A gentleman from the East Coast would commercialize it by adding camphor. So if you add nitrocellulose with camphor, it would stabilize, and it became the replacement of ivory. That was one of the transformative movement, and I don't think I discussed it, but people have been thinking about sustainability without calling it sustainability from an old time. Polyvinyl chloride, just a fact, you're not going to remember that. More PVC. Oh, also the microplastics. First cited instances from 1931. So this is the World War II era. A lot of plastic applications started developing during World War II to make light airplanes. And they were not available for commercial use because the US government controlled most of the supplies. So, even though these things were invented during this time, they didn't see commercial applications until later. 1939 was the first toothbrush. Oh, yes, toothbrush. I didn't think I talked about that either. Acrylic, PMMA, your nail polish. That was in 1936. 1941, polyethylene terephthalate, number 1, but was not commercialized for 30 more years. High-density polyethylene in 1951. Polypropylene, 1951. Styrofoam, 1954. It took a while for it to commercialize. Plastic pollution also, people started raising concerns as early as 1960s. And the garbage patch of 1997. And here come 2021 that United Nations is talking about sustainability goals. So we're discussing a lot of actions. But before I go further into some of the future aspects of it, I want you to think about your favorite ecosystem. And I can imagine someone, because we're closest to the beach, somebody would care more about ocean. So 8 million metric tons of plastic enter the ocean from the land every year. That is roughly $13 billion in monetary damage. And by 2050, we'll have more plastic fish in the ocean. And there's catch, because I'm going to show you some cool data. Because we actually are not even capturing the actual numbers because we don't have the techniques. We'll get into it. All right, maybe somehow you choose cloud to be your favorite system, This is Mount Fuji in Japan. Scientists took samples from the clouds. They found microplastics there. And not only that, it was part of an earlier hypothesis where people thought that these microplastics can cause environmental change or climate change in general. Actually, these microplastics can bring different water molecules together, and hence they can actually serve as nucleating agent for causing bad weather or more water droplets. So climate change is affecting us in every different form, and they discovered 9 different polymers. Some of them we went over. All right, so micro and nanoplastics. You hear that all the time, but what's the big deal? So if you took your hair strand, that is roughly 50 to 70 micron in diameter. Your beach sand is roughly 90 micron. Salt grain is roughly 50 micron. When you get into dust and pollen, that's typically less than 10 micron. And when we are looking at sizes less than 2.5 microns, combustion materials, that's when we are getting into nanoparticles. And nanoparticles are even worse because we actually had no idea of how bad the problem is. And we're going to get into the numbers. All right, so this is a study. So I bring at least 2 or 3 seminal studies that I do believe, I think they're going to be landmark for going forward. This recent study from the National Academy of Sciences, they sampled 3 different popular brands of water bottle. And previous estimates were that you had about 25 or 30,000 micro and nanoparticles. Well, how are you going to comment on something that you don't have a good handle on? So the techniques did not exist. These folks invented techniques, and what they found is that the number is closer to 300,000 than it is to $20,000, 20,000 nanoparticles. They found 7 different types of polymers. They refused to disclose what the brands are, because obviously they're going to get sued. But this is, needless to say, you are consuming microplastics in every day. And this is, they actually bought the bottles from store. All right. Again, as I said, maybe you don't care about the environment. This study is from 3 weeks ago, published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I don't know if anybody heard about microplastics in the heart artery or the plaques. Seems like some nods. I'm not going to go into the data, but this is one of the first direct evidence that we have found that of these nanoplastics and microplastics building in our body. And what I show here is, this is a macrophage, which is cell's protector. You know, just think about a defense cell. And these arrows indicate microplastics found within the macrophage from the samples. This is a multi-hospital study, and I think this has been keeping me sleepless for a few days. So I hope it affects other people. And it's a wake-up call. It's not a greenwashing moment anymore. We need to understand how severe the problem is. Similarly, outside the macrophages. All right, so here we come. How are we doing on time?
5 minutes.
Oh, wow. All right, so there are a lot of bioplastics that exist in the market. They're not all created equal, even though you think that the bioplastic that you're buying is the best kind. You can be fossil fuel based and still call it bio-based. So bio-based polyethylene is a new thing. My favorite section is bio-based, biodegradable, in which the feedstocks are derived from bio-based items, as well as the bioplastic is degradable. And I'm gonna really have to rush now. It's a great market opportunity. We can worry about that later. But I want to show you something really cool. So PHA, polyhydroxyalkanite. This is my favorite molecule, polymer actually, the one that I'm working through my company, Chawla Tech. And you can see that this is, what you see in green here is carbon reserves from microbes. They've been making it for millions of years. So yeah, shellac from India can take a side back. We got thousands of years. And this degrades naturally. It degrades in less than 90 to 180 days, 35 days in the right compostable conditions. This is versatile applications. It spans a lot of different properties, and depend on what, you don't want to get into the chemistry, but depending on what the R, X, and N's are, you can have different application. It compares very nicely with all the other current materials. PHA is degradable in no matter what condition that you look at. The next best one, the plant-based PLA that you buy from market, compostable solutions, that's PLA. Carbon impacts. Actually, PHA is shown to have one of the lowest carbon footprint of all the plastics. And I just want to say to comment on what I think about the outlook for future, we have to move away from we use food crops. The bio-based means, what do you mean by bio-based? The food crop, it can be sugar, it can be vegetable oil, but that threatens the world's food security. We need to move away from it. And we have plenty of waste carbon as is, and we can utilize that as a feedstock for microbes, get them to ferment, we break it open, we get our plastic, we can make whatever final application that we want out of it. And this is where my company, Chawla Tech, focuses. And I'm gonna just end by saying that plastics have been around for a really long time. New studies, and please look up if you want. If you're any skeptic, and I'm a lot more skeptic. I don't believe studies because I was like, this is just a scare. I think we're starting to see one of the direct evidence for human health and ecosystem. And again, bioplastics, not all bioplastics are equal. So we'd have to find the right technology because I think the time is now. And lastly, we need to invest in more low carbon index biomanufacturing, which is future. So from 100 years from now, I think that's the way plastics will be made. Not only plastics, all sort of chemicals. And we want to make a platform technology that enables us for success. All right, I think that's all I had, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. And we do have a break after this presentation, but we also have time for questions. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand and we can bring you the mic.
I was just with a CERN physicist. That's all these countries getting together in CERN, in Europe, collaborating to think together. And there's, they don't get paid a lot. But I'm thinking about your company and everyone else who represents a company that's really going to do something against, try and quench the fossil fuels. Do you have any sort of collaboration? This organization is phenomenal.
So we are building that framework. So one of the biggest challenges, so even for PHA, the first instance was in Imperial Chemical Industries based in the UK. They made it in 1980. At the time, the polymer costed $100 a kilo, and it was fundamentally difficult to bring it into the market. But currently, 40 years down the line, one of the challenges has been because we've become so specialized in our discipline. So I was a chemical engineer first, so I'd only focused on petroleum, and I did not want to do anything with biology. Then I was a material scientist, and then I didn't want to do anything with chemical engineering or biology. Then I was a biologist, and I did not want to do anything with. So this is where the problem breaks down. The reason this technology has not been able to take up is because of the lack of intersection. People not speaking the same language, and you can bring different people. I think the problem is then they bring different opinion and it doesn't go. So we need to train a workforce which is interdisciplinary in its approach. Nature doesn't care what you call yourself. We need to solve the problem, and I think that's an interdisciplinary mindset that can bring.
Good question.
So one of the big stumbling blocks in this area
has been the fact that fossil traditional plastics from those sources, it's cost. And as I've discussed with you, but many really promising technologies in bioplastic tech opportunities, they tend to be a little bit more expensive on a 1-to-1 ratio than traditional plastics. In your case, looks like it may be closer 1-to-1. Can you explain for the audience why?
Yeah, so great question. So one of the reasons, as I mentioned, historically, even in 1980, if we could make it, why was polypropylene or polyethylene has stayed at about $1 a kilo. We were at $100 a kilo. So at the time, the ratio was 100:1. Now we narrowed the gap to about 5:1. And I think the problem is beyond the green premium. So you can say that somebody would pay a green premium for maybe 5 times more. But it's been difficult, right? What customers say they will do versus they actually do, there are different behaviors. So as a society or as a technology company, our goal is to reduce the gap, but we cannot bridge the gap that much. So I think when the government comes in or other regulatory measures that can break that gap, and now with these studies, I think there is more precedent. I never took regulatory. You can forget government caring about you. It's one of the variables that's out of your control. But with the customer pressure from all these brands, so we're also working with the Fortune 500 company. It's just untenable. The regulatory is not able to catch up, but they are willing to pay the price. And as a society, are we willing to pay the price, or we keep on doing these damages to our health that we don't know what that might mean? I think, but it's difficult to bridge the gap. I think eventually in 10, 15 years, you are looking at the gap. If you tax fossil fuel more, that gap will keep on closing in.
Great question. Does anyone have another question? Okay. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for the talk, Ravi. I guess the I mean, it's great vision, right? But then the question is, how scalable is it, right? Because right now, all the plastics that are produced highly scalable, not only cheap but also quick to produce. So how quickly can we make bioplastics through the platform that you mentioned?
It is scalable, and that's where my training as a chemical engineer comes in. Polymers working on the bench or your microbe being able to make it on bench is not good enough. We need to make sure the scalability, and it's been scalable over and over, and we have thoughts. So as we are setting up our company, we are very clear that we do nothing in isolation. All these material science, process engineering, which is where you scale up, it needs to speak, and it needs to meet all the metrics and scalability. So I can guarantee you that I would not have signed up for this if I didn't think there was potential for scalability. So yes, there are already companies doing it. Companies are doing it using a different mode. Vegetable oil, sugar, that's already identified companies. CJ Biomaterials in Indonesia is a Korean company. Also, Danimer Scientific in the US, they're using vegetable oil, but that threatens food security. So,
Yeah, I guess what I was referring to was more not about the fermentation, but about, you mentioned greenhouse gases, how quickly you can actually capture the gas, right? That's probably the bottleneck.
But as our seminar, the keynote speaker told us that there is a $3 trillion industry that is in pipeline, right? So we can't wait for that infrastructure to, be ready so that we work on the next step. That's not, we can go into the studies. I can show you how many EPC projects are in pipeline for it to work.
Wonderful question. And we pass it. Michael?
It was a great presentation. So in terms of the greenhouse gases as a feedstock, would you have to have the plant be close to somewhere that is capturing the CO2?
That is one of the thoughts that, because then otherwise you're spending all this cost and energy to ship it. So we're in conversation with a plant in Texas. They have abundance of methane, for example. They want to get rid of it. And if anything, they will pay you to take it, right, representing a revenue stream. But yes, that's the thought, that if we can have these sites or these factories close to the already existing facilities, that would be one way. Great question.
Is there another question in the front there? Thank you.
Great talk. Have you done a life cycle analysis for this process, and does the carbon footprint compare per unit versus other sources of plastic?
Great question again. So I don't have my own number because eventually it will depend on what process. So you can't lock down a life cycle number until your process is locked down, and we are working on our technology. Just to give you a reference of what it looks like for other materials, and this is from literature, PHA is roughly 2 kilograms CO2 equivalent per kg of polymer produced. This is, however, based on vegetable oil, these numbers. So this is what these folks were focusing on. The companies, okay. This is nuance, as you know, that life cycle analysis also depends on what your system boundaries are, how well you're defining its gate, to gate, what framework are you using? What happens for biodegradable polymers, and this is a problem, we don't have good estimate of end-of-life assumptions. So let's say if end-of-life assumption, this biodegradable plastic is going into landfill. Petrochemical industry actually uses that against PHA or PLA. Well, they haven't gone against PHA yet because it's expensive. They don't think it will take off. For PLA, they show that, if it degrades, you're releasing the CO2 out in the air again. So that bar adds up for PLA. But to give you about the companies that are actually doing it as a renewable energy, they claim that PHA can actually be on the other side, negative. So theoretical equivalent is that per kg of CO2 that you took out from the atmosphere to make a polymer. But again, this is where I'm drawing my system boundary. But if I took end-of-life considerations, for which we don't have data, you can land in a different ballgame. But needless to say, even these numbers, I'm sure I don't know if you've kept up with the NOVA Institute. These numbers, even for petroleum industries, we didn't have the right numbers. And there is a 30% increase because of the new data that we now have for for all the traditional fossil fuel base. So to give you an answer, I don't have the answer for the exact number, but multiple studies have shown it to be lower than fossil fuel base.
Great questions. Did anyone else have another question? Okay, great. Well, we're going to take a brief break. We're going to reconvene at 2:15 for our next two presentations. But if we could just have another round of applause for Dr. Kala Fleming, for Dr. Ravi Chawla, and definitely connect with them later and look into their companies. They're doing great work. Thank you.